to us. More on that, I'm sure, as it happens over the next few months. Now, people who go bankrupt over the age of 52 could be stripped of their pension funds when the new pension freedoms begin in April. More than 4,000 people a year go bankrupt over that age in England and Wales. Pension funds are supposed to be protected by law from bankruptcy orders, but 2 years ago, a court case opened a loophole in that law, and that means bankrupts with a pension fund can be forced to take a quarter of it out as a tax-free lump sum and hand it over to their creditors. The rest of the pension remains protected, as the individual isn't free to do what they liked with it. But from April, everyone will be free to take out all their pension fund, and some insolvency practitioners say they'll try to take the lot. Well, at the heart of this problem is what's called an income payment order. That's an order by the court to give your creditors any money beyond the income you need to live on. We brought together two lawyers who specialise in bankruptcy cases. Stephen Hunt was one, a partner with Griffin's Insolvency Litigation and Forensics. The other, Situl Raithatha, Managing Director of Springfields Insolvency Practice. And I asked Situl Raithatha first about that 2012 case which opened up some of a pension fund to creditors of bankrupts.
We had a landmark judgment in a case that I was involved in, Raithatha versus Williamson. The outcome of that was that a bankrupt who was at a pensionable age but chose not to draw his entitlement, for most people that would be over 55, could be forced by or compelled by the court to do so. In the Williamson case, I was faced with a pension fund of around £1 million, and therefore a tax-free lump sum, the 25%, would have been about £250,000.
And you thought that was fair game for you to give to the creditors?
We did, yes.
Now, there's going to be a change in the law in April, which means people won't just be able to get a quarter of their fund tax-free. They'll be able to take the whole lot out. Stephen Hunt, are we going to see insolvency practitioners going for that whole pension fund?
Yes, I've also captured many pension funds under the income payment order principles. There's a window from 3 years from the date of the bankruptcy you can get an income payments order.
So it will only apply to people who are 55 or more, or in the 3 years leading up to the age of 55?
So 52 onwards, any person in that period who has not yet taken their personal pension, the trustee in bankruptcy could make that election for you. And with the change in the rules, that would mean that theoretically 100% of the fund would be available for creditors.
So some of it will be tax, of course, wouldn't it?
Yes.
So the Chancellor would get a bit and the creditors would get all the rest?
Yes.
Situl, do you think that's reasonable? Is that what's going to happen?
That is something that trustees will need to do because they have a duty to realise or maximise realisations for the benefit of the creditors.
And what about smaller pension pots? You talked about somebody with £1 million. That's a bit unusual. Are you going to go after smaller amounts than people who have got £1 million salted away?
Each case would have to be looked at upon its own merits, and there is protection for the court to assess the reasonable domestic needs of the bankrupt and his family, and they must be allowed for before an income payments order can be made.
So you'd say, well, they need so much a week or a month to live on, and that pension fund could be used for that, but the balance of it you would take for the creditors?
Yes, and I think this would be very relevant because there has been a recent case in the lower courts in Manchester where a judge declined to make an income payments order where he felt that the needs of the bankrupt had to be taken into account. It was a fairly modest pension, but there have been cases along these lines.
But isn't the idea of the law, the 1999 law, to protect people in retirement? Now, we're all talking about taking money out of a pension at the age of 55, which may be the very worst thing to do because you've got a long time to live after that. Shouldn't some of this money be preserved for a pension for the long term?
Well, the judgment the then government made in 1999 was that there was a trade-off between returning money to creditors who would go unpaid if they weren't able to get the pension, compared with the bankrupt becoming a burden on the state in the future. And Parliament expressed its view, and there we have the law. What you now have a position on either interpretation of the legislation is that, or the present law is that because of the reforms this year, you have a position where either under the statute, the entire fund can be cashed in the day after the bankrupt person is discharged from bankruptcy. So in theory, they could buy themselves a Lamborghini to celebrate
the famous Lamborghini,
Lamborghini, or it's the trustee in bankruptcy under the case law that can buy the Lamborghini. But in either situation, the government has to appreciate that the arguments behind the 1999 legislation have gone. They've decided to abandon the concept of being a burden on the state, so they have to revisit the exemption.
And do you think there should be a law to cover this? That the Treasury has told us it's not going to take any action. Do you think they should be looking at this and trying to put some fair principles in legislation?
Yeah, I think at the moment we need some clarity. The position seems to be all or nothing. For example, somebody in their late 40s could go bankrupt with a very large pension fund and end up paying nothing, whereas somebody...
Because 3 years later they'd be fully discharged.
Whereas somebody 10 years older could lose everything. So it's all or nothing. And that seems to be the unfairness. And I think we need some clarity and we need to have something that is fair to all age groups and is fair to creditors and bankrupts alike.
And of course, for every bankrupt, there are a lot of people owed a lot of money. Isn't it right that they should have some claim on what could be a big pension fund?
This year's creditors and next year's bankrupts, in many cases, if they can't get their money back, then they themselves, the knock-on effect goes on and on and on. So it is important for the insolvency profession to make these points and press the government to try and make a decision on this. They've just overseen it. They've forgotten it.
Stephen Hunt and Situl Raithatha. The Treasury told Moneybox there are no plans to change the law. Now, although the case doesn't apply in Scotland directly, we've been told by lawyers it is a potential concern there as well. Now, if you've got money